Hello, everybody, and welcome to Our World Today, the Unionist Perspective. Today, we're looking at a few topics that we believe are starting to be very thematic around various concepts that we've identified as potential topics. And so they will span across geopolitics, across internal and international affairs, across climate, across some good news stories and some stories around what's happening with the LGBTQIA community, and any other topics that we believe start to highlight a more comprehensive view of what is happening in our world today. So, to start off, I'm going to ask Nadia just to give us a little rundown of the stories that we'll be covering, and then we will go into the detail more.
Hi, guys. So we're starting off with getting to know how Harvard board broke up with Claudine Gay. That will be our main focus for today. Then, if we have time, we will look at a positive story on a stand-in dad in the LGBTQ community and how the stand-in dad helped in their big wedding day. And of course, if we have further time, we'll speak about why computer chips have become a new arms race. And I'll leave the next two stories as juicy surprises if we have time. Thank you.
All right, so our main story today, Claudine Gay resigning from her presidency at Harvard University. So the reason why we thought it was important is because it seemed like the story took such, can we say like amplitude, like such space in the media attention, and even the discussion leading up to her resignation. It took a really like large space in the digital sphere, and I think it was more than just like Harvard University. It was about belief systems and relationships as well, and geopolitics. And so I'm curious to dig into that tonight. And Sage, would you like to give us like the rundown of this story in particular?
Yeah. So this story briefly is basically about how Claudine Gay resigned, and about 6 months ago, she became the first Black president of Harvard University. And since that time, like very shortly after she became president, Hamas, launched its attack on Israel, right, on October 7th. And there was a lot of controversy on campus at Harvard. And this has been happening across college campuses, in the US and probably other places too. And basically Claudine Gay started catching some heat for not responding to this letter signed by a bunch of student groups on campus. And in the letter, it was ambiguous. When I read it, I felt it was ambiguous, and their language was probably purposely kind of vague, but what they were saying is like Israel is responsible for all the violence that has unfolded. And it was kind of some people read it as saying that Israel was responsible for the actions of Hamas, like the initial attack. And that caused like a lot of controversy, and like some Jewish students, were very opposed to that and everything. And then there was like a congressional hearing where she and the president of University of Pennsylvania and Massachusetts Institute of Technology they were all there. And they were asked questions like, would call for the genocide of Jewish people go against the code of conduct at your universities? And they answered it wouldn't in some cases, but they were implying that it wouldn't go against code of conduct in all cases. And that led to like a bunch of controversy. After that, some people who kind of work in the media sphere or who are kind of like conservative activists started going after her and portraying her as wrongfully hired, like just hired just because they wanted, diversity, which is a common thing that they do. And they started trying to dredge up accusations against her to build pressure for her to resign or to be fired. And they found some passages where she used like very, very similar language that other people had used, but didn't properly cite it or didn't cite it at all. But there's some disagreement about like whether she was being malicious and like literally just trying to steal people's ideas, or if it was just an honest mistake, or she just got maybe a little bit inattentive in her citations, right? When she was reading a bunch of papers, writing her own paper, and maybe she forgot to cite in some cases. But anyway, the pressure from the Israel-Palestine controversy and the plagiarism accusations kind of built up. And the Harvard board was kind of like strongly suggesting to her that she resigned, and then she did, And so, yeah, that's basically the story. And I'm interested to hear what you guys feel from it. Like, what is the spiritual truth here and what's really going on? And yeah, it's just brought up a lot of things about people feeling like if you're Black in America, or you're held to such strict standards. And she apologized for everything that she did, but it wasn't seen as enough. And so that's one thing that this has brought up. And also just the truth behind the plagiarism stuff, and also like how she has handled the whole Israel-Palestine, controversy on her campus, and what we feel about that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Sage. This actually brought up layers of feelings for me because you worked through all the layers that have been going on. And although, as Yureen was saying, it was kind of dramatized in the news, there is a lot to unpack here. One, her being the first African American, Black American president of Harvard, is that correct? Yeah, and if for them to say that this is like a controversy that didn't occur in the last 400 years in Harvard University, to have to go through that as the first Black president, that's hard. And your commentary when you posted that article about punishment versus discipline really strung a chord with me because when we speak of misalignment in our community, there's a lot more compassion. But in the real world, that you were referring to, like haters, it's not as compassionate to misaligned beliefs. And to me, I do feel that that was a misaligned belief to say that in some cases, genocide is okay. And in my belief, in no cases should genocide be okay. But there should have been more of a discipline because I think being the first Black president for Harvard is such a win and such a representation of everyone. But it didn't go like that, unfortunately. And I want to hear what you guys have to say about that, how you guys feel about that.
So I think primarily for me, it's what Sage spoke to around the standard that the first female Black president of Harvard is held to is a very real concept. And unfortunately, while we might want to believe that we are more progressive than that, it's just the opposite. And the standard, the requirement then is for the person to be above reproach, which puts tremendous pressure on that person because they're representing what is a minority and they're representing what has been used to discredit minorities in the past. And so a mistake for a forerunner under those circumstances tends to be more dire than if they weren't the first representative of a minority into a very senior, very exposed position in terms of an educational institution like Harvard, which is probably world renowned as one of the top universities in the world. So it does put her under tremendous pressure. And so the concern is that how much pressure can the person handle? And also, how hectically is a mistake publicized in this way? Because she's properly under scrutiny from all angles. So something that could have been simple and could have very easily been accepted as a cursory apology does become something much more significant.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, yeah, there are so many sides to the story there. I think just like the Israel-Hamas situation, it's a lesson in not like putting the blame on a certain category of people, which I think humanity still has to accept, like learn as a lesson. And I want to say, like, first of all, like we heard much more of the drama around this thing than her actual coming up as the first Black woman president of Harvard, which is kind of harsh, first of all. And then like I'm not sure, but the way you said the rundown of everything, Sage, it made it seem like she wasn't the only one responding to that question. Like the other two were also responding to that question. And they weren't under that much scrutiny. And I do remember another thing, like MIT, like a professor that was Korean said a word in Korean that was very close to the N word, and people wanted him to be fired. And I think like a lot of the scrutiny and the actual, you know, um, taking people up to like the standards of being progressive, they always befall, not always, but they a lot of time before the people of color, it seems. Like they're the ones that are under scrutiny. Like for example, in France, like it's like the Black actors and Black athletes that were constantly asked to speak up on Israel-Palestine situations, even though it was like the first 3 to 4 days of the situation, and people need to process things as well. And like white artists were just, there, and just because they exist, like they get to live without having such a scrutiny. And I think it can really be for us reminiscent of what is happening now around our community. And I guess like yeah, people do have a lot of they have ways to go from loving and discipline and actually loving someone and hating and trying to burn someone down, because this feels like a little bit too much. Like 40 quotes, like if like the whole paper was plagiarized, and these papers can be like 80, 100, 200 pages, 400 quotes It's a lot, but it's not the whole thing. Specifically when people that publish papers regularly, they tend to like quote a lot. So I don't know. I don't. Again, we don't know, but to go into that in order to try to question, her legitimacy as president, I think is a testament to how we don't actually know how to regulate our emotion and actually put in place progressive ways of having discipline just yet. And I guess there was something last that I wanted to say, but I think for now it's enough. I got my points across. And obviously, like, she was very clumsy about our communication, and there should be things in place in order to be able to change things. But I think lots of people are very aware of how the systems at MIT or like big Ivy League colleges work, and they work on press. They work on the absence of scandal. So if a scandal is brought up, they tend to want to erase it, no matter what. So that doesn't tend to be something that can end up in a loving decision. And I think that's what we saw. It's part of a system that, you know, puts reputation and image, even though it's superficial, as a priority, I think. And that's why media can have so much sway in the way decisions are made.
Well, I think if you consider that image is significantly important for those type of institutions, then you have to also consider that anything that tarnishes that image has an impact on a brand that has been built over centuries. And so while it does seem tough, it also has a significant impact on the position that such an institution commands in educational circles, in societal circles, in corporate circles. So, yes, it sounds like a witch hunt and it feels like a witch hunt, but you also have to consider the brand equity that is being destroyed by those kind of scandals.
I was going to also say, like, it feels like after that comment, people digged even deeper of how to give more fuel to the fire of like why this president should not represent Harvard. And how I've experienced our journey, like twin flame journey, and even learning about spiritualism, when you're met with such harshness and challenges in your life, it's best to ground even deeper and stand in your truth, stand in your divinity, which I believe for Claudine was very hard. That's why she resigned. And I almost wish that she did ground in her truth, ground in the divinity. Of course, she might not have had the support that we do to know, or even like you were saying about emotional support and emotional maturity. Not only did the public respond with emotional maturity, she didn't either. So it was like if she had that emotional support, she could have grounded deeper, and they could have been even more light to that situation of, you know what, maybe we're looking at this in a very harsh tone. Because for there to be a first Black president, it was a lot of a movement in the collective to even come to this point. And I don't know about the next time who the next president will be, but they always look at how ethnicity and how your identity had played through your mistakes. So now it's like a game of identity, who your background is, and how you can represent Harvard for the next time. So I think the healing for the core healing, I feel, is like going even deeper when you're challenged to ground your identity, ground your truth.
I do agree in some ways with the grounding. I also do think that this is this type of situation where you are kind of forced to step down, like you don't necessarily have a choice. I think that's what the call to talk about, like if she felt she was representing Harvard best was at the very beginning of the article. And that's why like she resigned afterwards. I think like it was obviously like a discuss through in things of big position, like big political position, big administrative position, this is how it works. Like you're not fired, you're kindly asked to step down, and I think that's what happened. Then, like I guess what we'll have to see is like who is going to become the next president and how much or how less he will play into the reverting back to old ways or old people or old ways of doing. And I don't necessarily blame Harvard for going into old ways of doing if this feels like the stability of old ways would make things die down. But like if it also could be like an old Asian man, why not? You know, don't necessarily have to be an old white man, but it also doesn't necessarily have to not be, you know, it doesn't have to be about race. And yeah, I guess we'll have to see. There's still a big hurt here. It feels very sensitive in my heart. And so yeah, it does feel like there's a lot of healing for a whole lot of people, and we'll just have to see how this plays out.
I love that. I really love that you mentioned that it doesn't have to be about race, and that clarity that you gave, that it was kind of like she had to resign. Because in my perception, I believe that, I wish she was grounding more into the truth, but this could also be a lesson for us to learn from, of how some things are, and to just surrender that.
Yeah, I also wanted to point out that like um I think only 2 out of the 3 presidents who testified before Congress about the anti-Semitism on campus, only 2 out of the 3 resigned. The MIT president also I think also said like in some cases if students called for genocide of Jewish people that it would be unacceptable, but in some cases it's like okay, but they've managed to contain the fallout so far. So she hasn't resigned, and they're kind of maybe having a better like PR strategy or something. Slash, she didn't come under as much fire as Claudine Gay because these people made a point of trying to take her down, like very deliberately, because they see it as opposing DEI in America. Like they don't want the diversity, equity, inclusion. But I feel like, so it does speak to that, but it also speaks to like, just people remaining grounded in values of love and not feeling too swept up in pressure, by people. Because like, yes, people make mistakes and they can apologize for them and they can like work to right them. But you do have to appreciate that, as a Jewish student in these colleges or as a Jewish alumnus or donor, when you hear that sometimes in some cases it's okay for students to call for that, like it probably is very disturbing to you, and you've got to be aware like the political pressure on the campuses when it came to like, because some people consider like that slogan from the river to the sea slogan, you know? Like they interpret it as meaning like it's like a call for like mass violence basically and displacement of Jewish people, which could be, but the thing about it is like you want to be grounded enough in love and like humanity and values to know to be able to say, no, it's never acceptable to call for that, for, you know, like no, it's against our code of conduct at our university to call for genocide. But I think they got tripped up on that because it's a really tricky, thorny thing right now. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to
I'm
say.
glad you pointing that out. That was what I forgot to talk about earlier. There was something like the very beginning of it was already a mess. There was an article that I saw a few months ago, and it was like why the big colleges don't want to speak out on Israel-Palestine war, Israel-Hamas conflict. But the actual core of the article, and this is like such a media thing to do, was directly targeted at Harvard. And what the big colleges, especially Harvard, were expressing, which was good, was that they wanted the campuses to be safe places for people of every ethnicity and every origins and every beliefs. And I thought that was a great response. And I think where they got tripped up is they tried to accommodate some of the anger of other people. And I think the letter was already kind of a way to amp up the pressure on them. It was not the message of love at the beginning that everybody believed in, but didn't express in the same ways. It was already an amped up way to pressure them. And they fell into that trap thinking that they would give in and they would have some kind of peace, and it got worse. It threw fire. It flew fire into the whole thing. And I think maybe this is a big lesson in holding up your boundaries, maybe. Yes. But it's like seeing as the world is so bent on having to necessarily take a side on that conflict and saying that this is the fault of this group of people or the fault of this group of people. I think this is very hard to see your stance as a boundary. But it was a boundary. It was love. And I think a lot of people don't agree with it, but it was. And yeah, I think that's the saddest thing. It was that at the beginning, this was like what kickstarted everything else.
I think you mentioned quite an important point in terms of the fact that there's still very much a desire amongst lots of people to have a side chosen, rightly or wrongly so. So there's always a finger pointed, and there always has to be an arm supporting that finger pointed. And so people are going to look for volumes in terms of pointing a finger and vilifying a position. Unfortunately, under these circumstances, vilifying the position also resulted in vilifying the person. The challenge, of course, is that as quite a senior person, in fact, as the representative of the ultimate leadership of an educational institution, you would have expected to be a lot more circumspect about the comments that she was making. And in all honesty, there should have been a much less committal statement than saying under certain circumstances certain things are acceptable, because it's really not. And so if you can't pick a position, then you pick the neutral stance because it gives you wiggle room. Unfortunately, she didn't give herself that wiggle room as the leader of this organization. And yes, it has resulted in her being the target, but she was always going to be a target. She just added another few arrows to the quiver in that target practice.
And I wish to express like a healing point on this, that it's rightfully so that students and alumni of Jewish background would feel unsafe given that comment. And it's also rightfully so that Muslims are feeling unsafe. So I wanted to emphasize that both sides are feeling unsafe. Both sides are experiencing violence and both sides are feeling unsafe with it.
But also we have to be open to the consideration that unfortunately masses of young people tend to be a lot more volatile. So a very neutral statement under those circumstances could actually just be used as fuel or fodder for their little flame. And that is partly the thing about why education is so important, because it does stop this volatility that doesn't necessarily take thought into reasonable process.
I don't think it's just education, though. Unfortunately, even with the highest degree of education, the integration as well as the alignment with the divine, with the spirit, gives that leadership of love, being led by love, and that complete understanding of it. Because even of the highest degree, being the president of Harvard, the thing that she expressed was not led by love. If a love was added to it, if integration was added to it, there would be a whole different perspective to it.
Yeah. Again, that's not something that people are taught. Like, she was just making do with the pressure which she was feeling, not having the spiritual tools to handle it, being very new to the position. So there are all these components. Like we could always look at what if she did. The thing is that it already happened. We can only look at the healing now and take comfort in the fact that it's always like, if it's not a win for someone, it's a lesson at the very least. And I think that will be good. Hopefully that will be good.
Yeah, the healing under those circumstances is definitely the choice to learn the lesson, right?
Yes. And talking about more positive wins, do you guys want to speak about the stand-in dad for the LGBTQ wedding and how that makes you guys feel as a community?
Yes, we do. So good news, good positive news. So at the end of the year, a TikTok resurfaced about gay dad, a married person who spoke out as a response to someone who was crying because nobody in her family supported or congratulated her for her engagement to her girlfriend. And he reposted this and he said like, hey, first of all, like very kindly, hey, first of all, like congratulations for your engagement. And he presented the way that standard dads worked. So basically, this is kind of a community association where really like a community of LGBTQ parents just act as your parents for your big events. So graduation, wedding, and everything in between. And it got viral with reason. Like the energy of this video was like kindness and support, and it was very heartwarming. And to see the smile of people that didn't have parents attend their big events is a super good thing. And I think for me, like as I studied it and sat with it, I think like a spiritual component is that it is one way to answer this big gap and need in the community for, well, a sense of community. You know, people are so alone these days. Like we talked about that at the end of the year in our recap and review. People feel so alone, and these people that are shunned by their family or like not supported, they feel even more isolated and alone. And a lot of the spiritual work that we do is healing that sense of isolation and aloneness and not feeling like you fit in or not feeling worthy. And I think this is just like an external response to like, hey, like humans aren't meant to live in community and we're meant to support each other. And yeah, that just feels good. It's like an all-around good thing. So yeah, I would just wonder, like, how do you guys see it? If you watch the videos, like, how do you feel about that? Did you know about it first? Or are you just discovering this?
Yeah, I immediately feel like soul family, soul friends. I feel like um people are understanding that there's a soul connection, and like even if you don't have the best relationship with your earth parents, you know that God is your true parent. And then you get to discover souls that you may know for a long time, or you may have gotten to know in this lifetime and has a heart to heart connection with. It reminds me of a story of a grandchild who texted the wrong number, and he ended up going to the grandparents' house for Thanksgiving. And that started a tradition for the past 10 years of going to Thanksgiving to grandparents that he would never have imagined. So, like, I really appreciate soul connection as a message through this story.
So the thing that stands out for me is something that we've spoke about quite a few times already, is this thing where there's a need collectively, the universe provides a response and provides an answer. And so while it's not blood relative, it's definitely the universe saying, well, I've heard you, and while I can't quite convince the person that should be there to be there, I do have a really good alternative if you choose to accept it.
Yeah, I love that. I just love this. I think it's a beautiful answer to the call, like like Granville was just talking about, and um, I really feel like it does provide um, some healing in that space, for those who may be feeling alone there or not supported in that way. Um, I think the most important thing, though, is that um, for people to realize that they are loved and supported by the divine always, and like the divine is their parent, like Nadia was saying, and um, I feel that I think this was something Shaleia said recently, like when you have a rich inner life, you really don't feel that loneliness or you don't feel that like void. So I think that um that's what's most important, but it also like points out that as a community we've healed in this space to like have something like this, that does act in that place of like I call in having love and support on that day, and here it is.
Yeah, it is good. And I feel like it does represent healing in that area of love and support and validation, for LGBTQ people, healing family. Yeah, it's definitely it's not the solution, but I feel like it's an example of like compassion, because like, yeah, of course, it's not the deepest solution. Like you still have to go to that place in yourself where you feel like not loved, not supported, not cared for or validated, and give yourself that and know that you have that with the divine or with God or whatever. But it's like compassion, because it's like this is a really hard, challenging experience to go through for like most people if your family is like completely not supportive of you. And yeah, everyone wants their family to support them and feels sometimes really attached. And so, yeah, it just feels really um like you really want someone to help you and comfort you. And I think that that's a really loving thing. But the healing would be just to know that like that, they're kind of like God sent really, but they're not your source. And like if you're part of like this community, the stand-in parents community or whatever, you're not the source of love of these people, but you're just here to offer them love and compassion, but you don't have to save them from their pain and their situation. Like it's not about saving, it's just about offering compassion, and then that person can choose to love themselves there, more. So, but it's a really good thing, I feel, for all. Yeah.
Yeah, I do agree, but I also still agree very much with that feeling that Isaiah was expressing at the beginning of it felt like Dan Blevins felt like there was a need for something in the space, and he felt that need. He answered the call to basically, it feels like it's its purpose, like it feels very natural and very positive all around. Like there's no feeling of, at least for me, there's no feeling of like trying to replace a parent or be their source, just like a feeling of he genuinely desires to do that in this lifetime, and that feels nice to everybody. And I think that's also good. Like I guess it's good to also see like the external results of collective healing there.
And speaking of not being a source, Granville, could you explain to us why other countries are not trying to rely on East Asia for computer chips?
Yeah, that was quite an interesting shift. Okay, so in essence, what is happening is that there's basically three major producers of these microchips or semiconductors. And the technology advancements are actually coming out of the US, but they are being produced in East Asia by three of these companies on a foundry model. So they're literally quite expensive production lines. And so the challenge with it is setting up counter spaces to start doing the same level of production is exceptionally expensive and time consuming. And also because of the US limiting the export of that technology to East Asia, specifically China, there is a lot of work being done in Europe, for instance, in terms of starting to build up their own foundry model in terms of the production of these microchips. And just from a microchip point of view, literally just about everything that's electronic in any way has some level of chip in it. And these chips control how things function, how cars function, how AI functions. Basically, it's becoming almost the lifeblood of most systems. And so the reliance on three major production places is going to become a challenge as the technology ramps up. Also, we must remember that these advancements start to go into weapon systems and all sorts of other things that are literally electronically controlled, including the distribution of electricity to parts of machinery and those kind of things. So there's a big reliance on three major producers in East Asia because they have a foundry model. And there is a big shift, specifically with the US and European Union, to start doing some of their own production and ramping it up by 2020 so that the concentration of production is diversified. So I think it is important to understand that chip technology is pervasive and it's constantly being improved. And so the reliance that we saw in terms of chips over the COVID period, where exports were limited, and therefore the production of cars and all sorts of other electronics were limited, had a significant impact on the livelihoods of people. So there is a requirement for diversification, there's a requirement to reduce the concentration risk, and there's a requirement to ensure that all of that technology that starts to feed defense systems and things like that is much more diversified. So it does shift the perspective of why chip production or manufacturing is starting to become similar to what was the arms race in the past in terms of everybody trying to ramp up their capability.
So I'm not super versed about like all the things that go into the technological aspects of it, but there is a feeling for me in terms of like spirituality where it feels like the end of the economy system as we know it in some ways. But that was the first thing that came to me when I read the article, and I was like, no, we mustn't do generalization based on only one market. But as you were talking, like the feeling came up again. And I think if anybody has taken Economy 101 in college or Intro to Economy, and Sage would know, as I do, like, you know that the system is based on like one country specifies in one production market and one country specifies in one production market because it feels better for the global economy, globalization as we know it, since like the end of the 1700s, sorry, to be able to have one leader economy that produces the most of one stuff that the rest of the world can rely on. Obviously, like in reality, it doesn't exactly work that way, but it actually feels like one of the first time that everybody is actively trying to go against that economy process instead of like just respecting it with exceptions in order to produce their own markets and production of stuff. So I don't know how that is going to develop, but it was a very a feeling that was very present in me as I was like sitting with the energy of everything. And I think like the development of technology and I guess the challenges that we encounter in terms of global security and things like that are going to become bigger and bigger, not because like the world is going to go into like a digital crash, but because like we are exposed exponentially growing in terms of technology every year. Like it's said that we double our capacity to handle technological stuff like every year or every 6 months, which is an exponential growth. So we need to be able to have support systems everywhere in order to support that, or create a new system or machine that can really integrate the whole of the new global need for support there. So there is going to be a shift, it seems. It feels like. And that's what I took from this. But I'm curious to know, how do you guys feel about my take on it, or if you had like any insights as well.
So I think you mentioned that the thing that you mentioned that's quite important is that exponential growth in technology advancement. And also, we need to remember that that technology just is starting to drive more and more of our daily lives on a much greater scale. And so if governments are starting to build supercomputers that are AI powered, that has significant implications for security and intelligence around the world. And so there definitely is a requirement for greater production in more places so that one entity doesn't control those technology advancements.
Yeah, and also just I guess with microchips and computer chips, like the thing that spurs us on is like China's threats toward Taiwan, right? Because like Taiwanese companies, like I think like one Taiwanese company alone produces like little more than half of all of these like chips, and like there's other Taiwanese companies too that produce a lot, and like it's a huge vulnerability that is there. And I think the world just, yeah, the world is like learning to like shore itself up against those kind of like shocks that can happen to the system. Because like, like if China like caused havoc in Taiwan, well, China partly relies on Taiwan too for chips as well, although Taiwan has banned anything having to do, like Taiwan is banned export of like super tiny microchips and stuff, and like all the technology or info needed to create them, because we don't need any of that, right? But yeah, like China would wreak immense havoc on itself if it invaded Taiwan, but for a while it would wreak some havoc on the whole world if the whole world was depending on Taiwan for chips, right? So yeah, you just want to like not be attached to like this person as being your source there and stuff. But I feel though ultimately if China did go down that route, it would just accelerate its own demise hardcore, because the entire world would not be on board with their like aggression. And Taiwan is like so crucial for the advanced economy of the world, whereas like with Ukraine being invaded, they are more significant for agriculture, right? So it's kind of like a different impact, you know what I mean? So I just thought that was interesting, like the difference and stuff, but yeah.
Very, very interesting. I was just thinking about innovation and material quality. Like if we are reliant on just a couple countries in the South East Asia or East Asia, what about innovation that other countries could provide for chips? And what about different material quality that maybe East Asia doesn't have that could advance that, which again goes into innovation. So for me, it feels good, of course, not to rely on just very small particular source.
Yeah, I think it feels good. It feels different from what was done before. I think before, there wasn't like enough speedy communication between countries in order to have this innovation be pretty much anywhere. And I think that was the system for 300 years. And I think probably what COVID has shown us and what ChatGPT being launched at the end of 2022 has shown us as well is that some of this innovation can actually be produced anywhere now because we have the capacity to be able to communicate these innovations from pretty much anywhere. Production is still a bit like hard. Material still has a cost, export still has a cost, of course, but it's lesser than what it used to be. And so maybe that's something that people are starting to reconsider in the sense that, China is losing like some of its production because people are considering like pulling out before it goes into a full-on crisis or things like that. So too, are reconsidering like, hey, maybe something that we felt wasn't possible before is possible now just because we have the means to do it now, even if we do it like 1 cent more expensive than Taiwan is doing it or something like that. Like products, like price of the production or things like that. Because obviously like the price is still like a drive factor for a lot of people, but I think people are starting to realize that price is not everything in production and that it's worth the risk to have your own I guess your own systems as well.
So the interesting thing about this technology advancement in terms of chip technology is that most of the advancement is actually coming out of the US, but being produced in Taiwan and those places. So there's obviously still a little bit of rivalry in terms of how much the US is prepared to let other economies advance under these circumstances. And so we must also consider that it's not all altruistic. There's definitely some agendas in terms of slowing the advancement of other aggressive economies under these circumstances, and we must not lose sight of the fact that everybody is vying for top position when it comes to technological advancement.
Yeah, do you guys feel like it would be beneficial for each country or whichever country is interested to expand their knowledge of AI and technology and create their own chips and provide that? Or do you feel like there should again be a couple more powerhouses, maybe in Europe, maybe in America, maybe in Asia?
I think that's for each country and coalition to decide, probably.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. Like if there was a greater level of cooperation under these circumstances for the advancement of humanity through all this innovation, for sure. But for as long as there are going to be hidden agendas, we do have to guard against concentration risk.
And I think countries already have their own like research and development departments, obviously. Like they're all vying for like the solution that would give them like the top advancement. They're not waiting on some miracles, like they're actively producing their own themselves. So we have to see how that plays out too, because there is a lot of power play here. Sage, do you have any last words?
No.
Perfect. So on that note, thank you everybody for the conversation. Thank you to everybody that's followed us. Also, please feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you'll find all our previous live content. And we look forward to seeing all of you again next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.